Okay, let's unpack this. We're diving deep into a single source. You shared this fascinating book looking at Bitcoin, not just as tech, but maybe, a historic shift.
That's right. The book really argues you can't just look at the code or the price. You need this holistic view. Economics, politics, philosophy, culture, it all connects.
Right, trying to understand the parts separately just doesn't work. And the book frames Bitcoin as like really fundamental, almost like finding the lever or the wheel. Simple, basic, not needing much tweaking once discovered.
Yeah, and it even uses this term, a mind virus.
Hmm.
The idea being that once you really encounter the concept, it just sticks with you, makes you rethink things.
So how do you even start thinking about something so different, especially if you're used to physical stuff?
So the book gives this mental model, which I found pretty helpful, actually, the Rock of Centaurus.
Ah, yeah, the Rock of Centaurus. Okay, so imagine this super rare thing, right? Perfectly divisible, totally invisible, and here's the magic part. You can send it anywhere, instantly, speed of light, no permission needed.
Exactly. But crucially, it still has that physical property. It can only be in one place at a time. That's key for stopping double spending. Unlike digital info, you can just copy and paste.
Got it. So it keeps that physical scarcity, but gets these, like, magical digital transport powers.
Yeah, the book says think of it like a boring metal, but its real magic is moving across a communications channel. Calls it Gold 2.0. Takes gold's good parts, leaves the physical drag behind.
Okay, so with that idea in mind, where does the book start explaining why we'd need something like this? It looks at a problem with money throughout history, right? The state controlling it.
That's a central theme, yeah. It traces money's evolution from physical coins,
Hmm.
mentioning things like coin clipping.
Oh, like filing off the edges.
Right, and how Isaac Newton, funnily enough, helped fix that with milled edges when he was master of the mint. Then it moves to gold-backed paper. China, Tang, and Song dynasties. Moving tons of metal was just too hard.
So the paper was just an IOU for the gold initially.
Initially, yes. But the book points to this big shift, especially around World War I. Nations needed to fund massive wars, way beyond their gold reserves.
And that led to pure paper money. Wasn't there that John Law quote, making gold out of paper?
That's the one. And that sort of became the reality. And as governments ditched the gold anchor, they also started shutting down competition. The state basically locked up its power to say what counts as legal tender, made alternatives illegal.
Like that U.S. law back in 1862 mentioned in the book.
Exactly. And the book argues this state monopoly on money is so normal now, we barely even question it.
And that state monopoly and the trust it demands is what the book says Satoshi Nakamoto was trying to solve. You see it in that Genesis block message, right? The Times headline about bank bailouts.
And Satoshi's own forum posts, talking about the root problem being the trust you need. Trusting central banks not to, well, debase the currency. That history was clearly on Satoshi's mind.
Which brings us right to the results of that trust. Inflation, monetary debasement.
Yeah, the book makes a distinction here. There's consumer price inflation, the basket of goods getting more expensive.
Which feels like a hidden tax, right? I think Friedman called it that.
Exactly, a hidden tax on your savings and income. And then there's asset price inflation. Stocks, real estate, that goes up too.
Yeah.
Often making inequality worse.
And the book's argument is this isn't just some accident. Governments have reasons to inflate.
Oh, definitely. It's a way to pay for things without directly raising taxes, which is always unpopular. Joseph Salerno points this out.
And it helps with debt, too, doesn't it? If you owe money in your own currency.
Right, you pay it back with money that's worth less, kind of cheating your creditors. The St. Louis Fed even put out notes acknowledging this aspect of inflation.
The scale of it since 1971, when the U.S. fully left the gold standard? It's wild, according to this source.
Staggering. M2 money supply, a common measure, went from maybe $700 billion then to, what is it now, over $20 trillion.
Wow.
Friedman himself was amazed back in '84 at the power central bankers had. Imagine what he'd say today.
And you feel it. That dollar from 1971. It's like having $6 today. Median home price jumps from $25K to over $300. S&P 500 from 100 to over 5,000.
And the book doesn't just stick to the U.S. It details those hyperinflation horror stories, too. Zimbabwe, Argentina recently, Weimar, Germany.
Yeah.
Places where savings just vanished overnight. Almost 1 billion people affected globally by these collapses.
Wiping out savings, causing chaos.
Yeah, the book frames these not as freak events, but sort of the logical endpoint when the power to debase isn't checked.
And Drawing on that history, the book argues this pressure, this tendency towards debasement is super relevant now, especially looking at the U.S. debt situation it describes. It sounds pretty serious.
It paints a picture of a debt crisis spiraling, yeah. Debt shooting up post-2021, maybe hitting escape velocity.
And that's just the headline number, right? The book mentions future obligations.
Exactly. Things like Social Security aren't on the main balance sheet. Stan Druckenmiller estimates the real figure could be over $200 trillion. And Lynn Alden describes this potential debt spiral dynamic. More debt means higher interest costs,
Which means more borrowing.
which might mean more money printing, causing inflation.
Forcing rate hikes, making the debt even more expensive. Yikes.
It's a tough spot. The book says, look, default is probably off the table. Catastrophic.
So the only option seems to be more debt.
That seems to be the path. But the question is, will global lenders keep buying U.S. Treasuries with the same confidence?
The risk-free asset maybe isn't so risk-free anymore, Luke Groman's point.
Right. And the book shows data. Figures suggesting central banks are already shifting. Less treasuries, more gold.
So what's the likely outcome, according to this analysis?
Continued reliance on monetary expansion seems likely. Maybe accepting higher inflation, maybe changing how CPI is calculated to mask it. But without some fundamental change, the book basically calls currency debasement a mathematical certainty.
Okay, so that's the economic angle. But the book stresses another major problem with state-controlled money: surveillance and censorship.
Yeah, this part goes deep into history, too. Starts with William the Conqueror's Doomsday Book, 1086.
That was like a giant tax survey, wasn't it?
Ostensibly, yes. But the book frames it as a tool for financial control. Knowing who had what let the state impose fines, extract value, reward loyalists. The Magna Carta, a couple centuries later, is seen partly as pushback against exactly that kind of financial oppression.
Then fast forward to the Soviet Union, a really chilling example.
Central planning, financial monitoring to crush dissent, seizing property. When the state controls your job, your access to goods, it forces conformity. Though ironically, the book notes, this also fueled a huge black market based on trust.
And the Nazi regime. The book
Yeah.
details their financial persecution. It's horrifying.
Absolutely systematic.
Yeah.
Nuremberg laws pushing Jews out of professions, seizing businesses through Aryanization.
Forced registration of assets just so they could grab them.
Exactly. Weaponizing things like the Reich flight tax to steal up to 90% from Jews trying to escape.
And after Kristallnacht, finding the victims and seizing their insurance payouts.
That confiscated wealth directly funded the Nazi war effort. It's a stark example of financial control used for evil.
Moving closer to today, the book points to Venezuela. Hyperinflation, yes, but also currency controls.
And that carnet de la patria system, linking access to food, medicine, services to political loyalty. Using finance as a direct control mechanism. Some call it a social credit system.
And the book warns this isn't isolated. There's a global trend towards more digital financial surveillance.
Often justified by national security, sure. But Freedom House reports show it's frequently used against opponents, activists, journalists.
It makes you think about that Eric Voorhees quote the book includes: financial freedom becoming a privilege, needing permission to transact. It's getting close to needing permission to exist.
It's a huge change from just over a century ago before widespread income tax and financial tracking.
The book even brings in Foucault, panopticism.
Right, the idea that just knowing you might be watched makes you police yourself. Applied to finance, these digital trails create a sort of constant low-level fear, a chilling effect.
Okay, so the book lays out this really long history. State control, debasement, surveillance, money as a tool of power. So after outlining all these deep-seated problems, the big question becomes, can money be designed differently? Can it resist this control?
And that is precisely where the book brings Bitcoin back into focus. It argues Bitcoin potentially is that different design. It flips the script by encoding value as data.
Back to the Raka Centaurus idea.
Exactly. Letting value be stored and moved in a way that bypasses those traditional vulnerabilities.
Right. The book contrasts physical things like shepherd's collars, obeying physics, only in one place with ledgers.
Ledgers are just information. They need a trusted keeper to be reliable.
And most of our money today is just ledger entries, isn't it?
Over 90% in the U.S., the book says. No physical form. Just a digital number on a bank's server, which means it's vulnerable to all those issues: control, debasement, seizure.
Even old gold certificates relied on trusting custodians, record keepers, the legal system.
Layers of trust. Bitcoin aims to minimize that reliance on trusted third parties.
The book calls it synthetic commodity money. George Selgin's term.
Meaning its value isn't just belief, but comes from something tangible, in a way.
Yeah.
Unforgeable costliness.
And that's where mining and proof of work come in.
Right. The book explains it without getting too technical. It's about using real-world energy, computation, to secure the network. That energy expenditure makes the digital record costly, hard to fake. It anchors the digital information in physical reality.
Kind of flips the oracle problem. Instead of bringing outside info in, it uses inside energy to create digital proof.
That's a good way to put it. Miners expend energy solving puzzles, bundling transactions, getting rewarded with new Bitcoin and fees. Hundreds of thousands globally competing.
And crucial to this whole thing, the book stresses absolute scarcity.
Yes, that 21 million cap, hard-coded,
Oh.
enforced by everyone running the software.
And maintained by the halvings, right.
Yeah.
Every 4 years, the new supply gets cut in half.
Until around 2140, when the last fraction is mined. We're already over 94% there. And unlike gold, if demand skyrockets, you can't just mine more Bitcoin faster. The schedule is fixed.
So these design choices, proof of work, scarcity, give Bitcoin properties that the book argues make it resistant to state control.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like decentralization. No one owns it. No one controls it.
Anyone can run a node, right? For pretty cheap.
That's at $100, yeah. To verify everything independently, miners need specialized hardware, ASICs, but anyone can potentially buy one. The more participants, the more resilient it is.
Which leads to censorship resistance.
Because it's so distributed, no single miner or group can easily block transactions they don't like. It's economically irrational for them to try long term.
Then immutability. Once something's in the blockchain, secured by all that work.
It's incredibly hard to change. The chain with the most accumulated energy behind it is the accepted truth.
Borderless too. Like
Yeah.
the internet. Transactions just flow.
No need for permission to cross borders. Bypasses capital controls.
And peer-to-peer. Direct. Like cash.
Right. Even if you ban exchanges, people can still trade directly with each other.
But maybe the most powerful property the book highlights is unconfiscatable and portable.
This is profound. Your wealth is data, tied to private keys.
A sequence of words you can literally just memorize.
Exactly. Compare that to gold, land, things that can be physically seized, or digital fiat, which is just an entry someone else controls.
The book mentions historical events, fleeing, persecution, partitions, wars, being able to carry your wealth in your head.
It's a game changer. Protection relies on cryptography, keeping your keys secret, maybe using things like multisig for extra security.
And the book calls Bitcoin the first public digital payments infrastructure.
Yeah, like the internet is for information. Before Bitcoin, sending money remotely meant using private bank ledgers, like SWIFT. Bitcoin's blockchain is the shared public ledger open to anyone. Doesn't matter who you are, where you are, create an address for free, you're in.
Okay, but it can't all be smooth sailing. The book must address challenges, criticisms.
Oh, absolutely. It tackles them directly.
Like, how do you actually kill Bitcoin?
The book uses that analogy. It's like trying to collect every speck of gold on Earth and shoot it into the sun.
Possible in theory, maybe, but practically impossible given how distributed it is.
Right. It looks at specific attack vectors, too. The 51% attack.
Where one entity gets majority mining power.
Yeah. Could potentially double spend, block transactions, but the book argues the economics make it self-defeating. You'd spend a fortune on energy and hardware just to destroy the value of the asset you're attacking. You lose money.
What about the developers? You're trusting them not to sneak in bad code.
That's a valid point about any software. But the book emphasizes Bitcoin is open source. Thousands of eyes review the code. Changes need wide consensus. It's not like a typical company pushing updates.
And Jameson Love's quote, software's never finished. It evolves.
Right. And 99% of Satoshi's original code has already been rewritten, improved by the community.
Quantum computing, that comes up a lot.
It does. The theoretical threat is breaking the encryption, or centralizing mining. But the book points out, large-scale quantum computers capable of this don't exist yet. It's speculative, a long way off, though the community discusses potential future safeguards.
And what about all the other cryptocurrencies, altcoins? Are they a threat?
The book argues Bitcoin is unique, a path-dependent invention. Can't really be replicated or overtaken in the same way.
Like trying to invent a second internet.
Something like that. Plus, most altcoins aren't even trying to be peer-to-peer digital cash, disrupting central banks. They have other goals. And money has that incredibly strong network effect. The oldest social network, the book calls it. hard to displace.
There's also that concern about the long-term security budget.
Right, as the block reward the new Bitcoin miners get decreases with each halving. Will transaction fees alone be enough to incentivize miners to keep securing the network? Especially if the price doesn't keep rising significantly.
What does the book say to that?
Well, first, it points out that historically, hash rate, the total computing power, has only gone up, despite halvings, and Satoshi anticipated this. The white paper explicitly says fees are meant to eventually replace the subsidy.
And layer 2 solutions, like Lightning.
Exactly. They could make small payments cheap and fast off-chain, increasing demand for final settlement on the main blockchain, boosting fee revenue. Interestingly, that fee death spiral worry has been around since like 2011 on Bitcoin forums. It's not a new concern.
Okay, let's talk volatility. That's probably the biggest criticism you hear day to day.
For sure. But the book suggests zooming out. Look at the 4-year moving average, aligning with the halving cycles. It shows a pretty consistent upward trend, especially for long-term holders.
And the volatility itself is decreasing over time.
That's what the data suggests, yeah. As market cap grows, adoption spreads, regulations get clearer, Glassnode data shows this trend.
And there's that cognitive point the book makes.
Right. Is Bitcoin volatile? Or is the thing you're measuring it in like the dollar volatile and constantly losing value?
1 BTC is always 1 BTC.
Exactly. The volatility is mostly perceived from the perspective of fiat currency, until Bitcoin maybe becomes a unit of account itself, which the book sees as years away.
Okay, the big one. The environmental debate. Energy consumption.
The book tackles this head-on, but it frames it carefully, warning against value policing.
Meaning, judging whether Bitcoin is a worthy use of energy compared to, say, Christmas lights or clothes dryers.
Precisely. It acknowledges Bitcoin mining uses energy. Proof of work requires it, but then it highlights environmental benefits that often get ignored.
Like using stranded energy.
Exactly. Remote renewable sources, hydro, geothermal, solar, in places where the energy grid can't reach or handle the load. Think parts of Africa, Iceland. Bitcoin mining can monetize that otherwise wasted energy. Gridless is doing projects like this in Malawi, Kenya, Ethiopia.
And mitigating methane flaring.
Yeah, that's a big one. Capturing natural gas at oil wells or landfills that would otherwise be burned off, flared. Methane is way worse for warming than CO2. Using that gas to power miners converts it to less harmful CO2, potentially reducing overall emissions while generating revenue.
The book also speculates on motivations behind some critiques.
It suggests governments might use it to justify bans, energy companies to deflect from their own impact, or competing crypto projects to promote their less energy-intensive alternatives.
So the book's conclusion on energy.
It calls for nuance, ethical engagement, dialogue, education, not just knee-jerk judgment. It's complex.
Moving beyond the tech and economics, the book really emphasizes the philosophical side, doesn't it? Especially in the later parts.
Absolutely. It argues you can't fully get Bitcoin without understanding the ideas behind it. It frames this core conflict. The state's claim to control everything, sovereign prerogative, often justified by ideas like Hobbes' social contract.
Giving up liberty for order.
Versus the idea of the self-sovereign individual who has inherent rights, including financial autonomy.
And it makes that bold analogy. Separation of money and state, like church and state.
Yeah, radical today, just like separating religion and politics was centuries ago. It uses that Thomas More example, I die the king's good servant, but God's first, resisting state overreach on fundamental matters.
Bitcoin as a potential tool for that separation.
That's the implication, a necessary step, perhaps.
And it traces Bitcoin's roots back to the cypherpunks.
Right, their whole movement, the manifesto, advocating for privacy tech as essential for freedom.
Privacy is necessary for an open society, Eric Hughes. Privacy isn't secrecy. It's about control over your information.
They saw cryptography as a defensive tool against surveillance.
And Bitcoin was directly inspired by them.
It offers pseudonymity, transactions are public, but not tied to your real name by default.
Though the book notes KYC rules contradict that historical anonymity of cash.
And acknowledges chain analysis tools exist, creating a tension between transparency and privacy.
The open source ethos is also key here.
Massively important. Developed collaboratively, peer-reviewed, consensus-driven changes, collective ownership makes it robust.
The book connects money to broader culture, too. Consumerism, time preference.
Yeah, it looks at consumer culture, the endless buying, the cult of the new. Money is the main measure of value. William Leach's ideas.
And the downsides. Environmental strain, inequality, debt.
Right. The treadmill of consumption, as Juliet Shore called it. This ties into time preference, high time preference,
Yeah.
wanting rewards now, low time preference, valuing the future, enabling saving and investment.
Like Stoicism, Seneca, valuing long-term well-being.
And the book suggests Bitcoin, as a scarce asset resistant to inflation, could encourage lower time preference.
Because it holds value over time, incentivizing saving rather than immediate spending.
Potentially, yes, letting you store your labor's value without it constantly eroding, a contrast to a system that often pushes debt.
Narratives and memes also play a big role in the book's analysis.
Huge. It talks about social constructs, stories shaping reality, Searle, Harari, and applies Robert Schiller's narrative economics, how compelling stories drive markets, spread like viruses.
What are some key Bitcoin memes the book discusses?
Not your keys, not your coins is a big one.
The self-custody mantra, don't trust exchanges.
Exactly. Captures that core principle of control. Even Gary Gensler mentioned it.
And the Bitcoin sign guy.
Yeah, holding the Buy Bitcoin sign behind Janet Yellen. The book sees it as symbolizing opting out, anti-establishment sentiment. And that notepad selling for $1 Mellers shows its cultural impact.
The book wraps this section with, Bitcoin is a mirror. What does that mean?
It means our reactions to Bitcoin fear, excitement, skepticism often say more about us, our own beliefs about money, trust, the future, than about Bitcoin itself.
And it compares reactions to Bitcoin to historical skepticism about other new tech.
Right. It's a natural human instinct to be wary of the unknown. Daniel Batten's point about erring on the side of caution.
Like fears about electric light, fires, health issues, disrupting sleep.
Or bicycles, bicycle face, danger for women, upsetting social norms.
It reflects deeper views too, right? Tech optimism versus pessimism.
Exactly. Like the Luddites versus the boosters of the Industrial Revolution. Bitcoin surfaces these same tensions.
So Bitcoin forces us to ask fundamental questions.
What is money? Ross Stevens quote. We've taken its reliability for granted recently, the book argues. Bitcoin pushes us back to first principles.
And Stevens also framed Bitcoin as hope, right? In an age of surveillance.
Yeah, a tool for financial security, which is foundational on Maslow's hierarchy, enabling higher pursuits by protecting against financial oppression. It demands that holistic view.
Okay, let's pivot to how this is actually playing out. Market adoption, geopolitics.
Oh,
The book gets into that too.
right. It mentions adoption trends changing. It's not just early whales anymore.
No, the distribution is getting much broader, more egalitarian, according to the book's data. The biggest group now holds almost 60% of the supply, and it's like over 100 million people. Large holder share has actually dropped significantly since 2012.
Selling to smaller holders. Exactly. The fastest growing group is people holding less than 1 BTC. The book argues this grassroots spread is unique, can't be replicated.
Network effects must be huge here.
Definitely. More users, more value, more utility, more security. It feeds itself. And money, the book repeats, has the strongest network effect.
Younger generations seem more open to it.
Millennials,
Yeah.
Gen Z.
Yeah.
Grew up digital makes more sense to them. Plus, economic uncertainty pushes them to look for alternatives. The book suggests their views will increasingly shape things as wealth transfers. Survey data backs this up.
And financial inclusion, helping the unbanked.
A major point. Places like sub-Saharan Africa, Nigeria, huge numbers unbanked facing high inflation. Informal savings groups are common but risky. Bitcoin offers a way to save securely, outside the local system, protecting against inflation.
Geopolitically, the book talks about the U.S. dollar's dominance.
It's exorbitant privilege, yeah. How U.S. policy affects everyone.
And the SWIFT system as a tool of that power.
Right. Cutting countries off from SWIFT is a major economic weapon, a constant threat.
Which is driving de-dollarization efforts.
That's the argument. The weaponization of the dollar is a wake-up call. BRICS exploring alternatives, China looking beyond SWIFT.
And Bitcoin fits into this picture how?
As a politically neutral alternative, outside any one country's control. Some countries under sanctions, like Iran or Russia, are reportedly exploring crypto to bypass restrictions.
What about government bans? Do they work?
The book argues they're mostly ineffective, even counterproductive. A ban signals the government feels threatened, which kind of validates Bitcoin's significance, like prohibition boosting bootlegging.
Or banned books becoming more popular?
Exactly. Sparks curiosity. Plus, there's the international competition aspect. A prisoner's dilemma.
If one country bans it, innovators and capital just go elsewhere.
Right. Countries that welcome it, like Singapore, UAE, Switzerland, gain an edge. Trump's call for the U.S. to lead reflects this dynamic.
So the book sees Bitcoin as kind of inevitable now, past the point of no return.
In many places, yes. especially after the U.S. approved the spot Bitcoin ETFs in January 2024.
That was huge for mainstream acceptance.
Absolutely. Legit.
Yeah.
Sized it for regular investors, embedded it deeper in finance, made outright bans much harder.
What about illicit activity? That's always a concern raised.
The book addresses it, but puts it in perspective, estimates that hundreds of billions, maybe trillions, are laundered through traditional banks annually.
So crypto crime is small potatoes in comparison.
Relatively speaking, yes. And the proportion in crypto isn't growing, despite adoption, partly due to regulation and tracking tools, though that impacts privacy, the book notes.
So ETFs are like a gateway drug for Wall Street money?
That's the phrase used. Makes it super easy for traditional finance to get exposure without dealing with keys or exchanges, and the book highlights that whole saga with the SEC approving futures ETFs but denying spot ETFs for years.
Until the courts called their reasoning arbitrary and capricious.
Right. Forcing the approval, a major turning point.
Wow. Okay, so we've really covered a lot of ground from this book today. It paints Bitcoin as this foundational invention, tackling deep historical problems with money, surprisingly resilient, philosophically rich, and now seeing real global adoption and impact.
I think the core takeaway from the book is that it's way more than just tech or finance. It challenges these really fundamental systems, trust, control, value that we usually take for granted. It forces a rethink.
And here's where it gets really interesting to think about for yourself. Based on everything we've discussed from the book, what does this mean for how you approach money, savings, and control in this digital age?
Yeah, that raises a crucial question. Considering that history of financial control and debasement the book lays out, what role could something like Bitcoin actually play in preserving individual autonomy and economic freedom moving forward?
So, what does this all mean? It means this book offers a ton to chew on. We've hit many key points, but digging into the source itself would reveal even more. It definitely encourages you to keep thinking about these big questions about money, power, and the future.